Okay, let's see here. What do we got? Oh, no. The theme today is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indiana Jones. Christopher Amrich wants to know, what is the single essential piece for an Indy cosplay? Hat, whip, gun, jacket, etc. Which pieces can you get by with cheaper ones and knockoffs? Well, that's a really good question. Hang on just a second. I'll be right back. You knew that I was going to come back with this guy. Yeah. So this is my Adventure Built Hat Company Raiders hat. This one is made by Mark Kidder. And the thing is that as more and more people enter the Indy fray, Todd's Costumes has my favorite jacket, even though it's definitely one of the less expensive jackets. Todd Costumes jackets are fantastic. Their weight is great. And that's the jacket that I was wearing when I did the Mythbusters Raiders episode. The whip you can totally go less expensive on. The trick is, and there, I think my main takeaway from talking about Indy cosplay is going to be Etsy, because Etsy has become a really important powerhouse of artisans plying their wares in an affordable fashion at multiple tiers. So one of the things I love about Etsy, not only do I love being able to communicate and commission and talk to people and maybe even commission them to build things they didn't even have in their store, but I also love the fact that people will include, like, well, you could buy this version or this version. You could buy it finished or unfinished. You could buy it in these pieces and then you supply these others. So you might find, and I haven't even looked, but there might be someone on Etsy who's making hats that they block to look right. So, you know, this is, my hats were bouncing around here for a long time. So I went through a thing early on in COVID where I re-steamed them, unshaped them, and then put the crown and the folds back in to my, and it's not 100% correct. Like my Indy hat crown is not necessarily perfectly screen accurate, but it works for me. It's like the way I like it. So if you're going to look for a whip on Etsy, you don't necessarily have to buy the most expensive one. What you're going to notice the difference between, in general, the difference between expensive whips and inexpensive whips is the more expensive they are, the more they look like a kind of a piece of flesh, the more that taper is really, really like smooth. But there are sellers on Etsy selling whips for like $100 that are absolutely great. I think I have one for one of my kind of trooping Indy cosplays. You can definitely get by with less expensive boots. You don't have to get the Aldens. There are lots of different pairs of like Red Wings and other great boots like that you could find on eBay, even used versions on eBay or Craigslist that would work just great. It's a much bigger question than I have time for here. And I really should have like props and talk about it. But look on Etsy. Etsy is fantastic. And again, the best part about Etsy over most other purchasing platforms for me is that when I have specific questions, I'll get really specific and wonderful answers from the seller. I just bought a Hellboy pouch because I wanted an extra one for my belt from a Etsy seller in Kazakhstan. Yes, in Kazakhstan. Apparently the most cosmopolitan of the stans. Stans? I don't know. At any rate, Etsy. Jack Fair wants to know, how do you feel about the fact that Raiders would have turned out the same whether Indy was involved or not? Yeah, I definitely know that. Nazis would have found the Ark, Bellic would have opened it, everybody died. It's not entirely true that the movie would have turned out exactly the same with or without Indy's participation. While that is true for most of the narrative, it becomes really important that Indy and Marion are the two survivors of the death scene in which the Ark kills all the Nazis. And the fact that Indy was witness to this whole thing, first commissioned by the government to go find the Ark, find Tanis, which, by the way, Tanis was found by my friend Sarah Parkick. I'm going to name drop that every time someone says Tanis. I'm going to be like, my friend Sarah, the space archaeologist, found it. He was charged to find Tanis and find the Ark and keep it from Hitler. He didn't succeed at the last part, but it turned out he didn't need to because the Ark already knew what good and evil was and decided to take care of evil itself, which is awesome. But then you've got this island full of dead Nazis and a very dangerous Ark of the Covenant. Is it safe there? And I don't think the answer is yes. I think that the fact that Indy was the survivor there, and Indy was the one who was able to, I don't know, presumably get it back to the United States. They didn't walk you through that part of the narrative. It's important that he is there, that he is that witness. I mean, if you're really going to start to pick apart the problems with Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy is a terrible archaeologist. Like, there are bigger problems with the plot than the fact that Indy is somewhat inconsequential to its progression. He's a terrible archaeologist. He's like putting stuff in his pockets. And I mean, you know, it's a romanticized version of the whole thing. The whole thing is romanticized. So I don't mind. Harrison Ford's interpretation of that character is still deeply moving to me, as it was when I first saw it at the age of 13 or 14. There is still a weary game willingness to do the thing that has to get done that Indy carries in his whole persona that I find moving and inspiring. So I stand on it that I don't mind. I agree that he's mostly inconsequential to the plot. It doesn't bother me at all. Todd Corley asks, your Maltese Falcon video from years ago was when I really started appreciating you outside of Mythbusters. Have you ever done an Indiana Jones idol in that fashion? No, I have not. I will say that having worked at ILM, I possess a hyper accurate, one of the more accurate castings of a stunt idol. And I had it gold plated a few years ago. Would you like to see it? Yeah, I think you would. Hold on just a second. And just as a note, just occupy yourselves for 30 seconds because I have to pee and I won't be able to hold it for much longer. So I'm going to pee and quickly get my idol and I'll be right back. Okay. Hi. Thank you for waiting. That was, I'm sure, I was thinking about this. That's the most people that have ever thought about me peeing at one moment. There, that happened. I couldn't find my super accurate idol. It's probably in my house. Some of the most important pieces to me, they move back and forth as I need to have them near me. But here's my second favorite idol. This one is actually made of bronze. It is beat up. It rattles because I lost something inside of it. And since I only have this tiny little 1/4-inch hole in its bunghole here, I can't get that thing out. Sadly, it rattles. So I may actually pour some glue in there at some point. But this came about from an RPF run a few years ago. It's bronze, but it's heavy. It's probably like 5-6 pounds. Oh, it's great. But you had a specific question. Have you done an Indiana Jones idol in that fashion? No. And part of that reason is because, you know, I looked at the Maltese Falcon and there were no copies that came close as far as I was concerned. Close in the way that I needed those copies to be close. And that's exactly the kind of position in which I get kind of cranky enough about the lack of access to the one that I want that I start to realize I should make the one that I want. Hence, you know, this guy, hence the Blade Runner pistol, hence the Maltese Falcon. With the idol, that casting that I had that came from a mold at ILM that we bounced around. I mean, most of us who worked there ended up with one. Spoiler: this happens in the film industry. It's just, things fall into rubber and they come out in plastic. But because I have one that's cast from a screen lineage, I don't feel the burning need to like figure out all the details and make it exactly perfect. I have several copies that some wonderful RPFers have done runs of, and they satisfy so much of what I want out of the idol that it's not a candidate really for that. Maybe even a more viable candidate would be Sankara stones, since I famously lost one of mine at a party I threw at Comic-Con a few years ago. And a lot of people have made beautiful Sankara stones out of clear amber-colored resin with gold leaf flakes inside. And I have ideas about how to do that might be different or yield one that I really like. But that's also a whole kind of wrapping your head through the casting process, because casting large amounts of clear resin is always a nightmare. It's always a nightmare. Clear resins are they are the death by a million cuts, because they react with different kinds of silicones. They react with different kinds of release agents. They don't set. They get gummy. They just the number of specific and weird problems you can run into with crystal clear resins is just like make you go nuts. So I'm not like chomping at the bit to go back into that. But is there another? I do actually have a really beautiful Smith & Wesson 5-shot, I think 5-shot, I can't remember, that Indy is carrying in the very beginning of Raiders. And I have a demilled version of that, which means actually it's been welded so you could never make it even loadable, let alone fired, but it looks perfect. And I recently was sent, I did a front sight on it, because the one that I got had a longer barrel. I had to chop the barrel down, and then I machined my own front sight. And then my kids were here playing pool, and that front sight went missing. And it dropped off the gun, and we never found it. And then an RPFer who did a beautiful run of front sights sent me one. I still have to do that. So the Raiders gun might be the next one I kind of do a deep dive show and tell on. And it's not like I did a ton of work on it, but it's perfect. Like when I finally put this sight on, it will be perfect. And so if I put it next to the Blade Runner gun, it's like I've got two of Harrison Ford's most iconic sidearms. That's awesome. Yeah, that would be really neat.